Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. In this episode, my guest is Ian Morgan Cron. Ian's a best-selling author of The Fix, Enneagram expert, I think I pronounced that correctly, Ian, but you can tell me otherwise, and podcast host. Ian's going to reveal how the 12 Steps program is not just for alcoholics and addicts, but can be key for anyone to take control of their life. So welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Philip. It's good to be with you.
So you've been very open about your own 30-year journey with recovery and alcoholism. Can you tell us about your experience of drug and alcohol addiction? You know, perhaps what were the causes?
Sure. Well, I mean, my journey with the 12 steps goes back many decades. I first got sober when I was 27 years old, when I found myself in a very dark place with drinking and in those days, there were no treatment centers, there was no rehabs, and, so your only alternative was go to a 12-step program, like Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's hundreds of others for different mental health issues and addictions and whatnot. So off I went, as a young man. And, I like to say that my first go round, I was only auditing the class. Right. Like I wasn't completely sold yet. And there was part of that I wasn't to blame for. I was a very young guy. And, in those days, there weren't many young people in those rooms, and so I was having trouble connecting. But the one thing it did for me is it expelled the desire to drink. And that was wonderful. And then I spent, a bunch of years just abstinent, at the same time, not working a program of recovery, but just abstinent. Right. And life was great, until, 2020 when I relapsed, and found myself in 30 days of treatment, this time for medications that had been prescribed to me, namely Adderall, Xanax, Klonopin, all of the COVID demons. And I returned to the 12 steps and man, I just was like seeing them again with new eyes. It was like, holy smokes, this is amazing. As to, what caused it, addictions are incredibly, incredibly complicated, multi-pronged, right? So they are, I think, genetic, familial. I think they are, sourced from trauma. They're sourced from, countless places, that can lead to an addictive cycle. I'm just really glad I found a program that has not only helped me to move past my need for those types of external solutions to internal problems, and found something really that made my life better than it was prior to my relapse.
For those of us that don't know, can you just talk a bit about the 12 steps and what it is?
So, sure. Yeah. So the 12 steps of recovery were written in the 1930s by an American stockbroker named Bill Wilson, or Bill W, as they often call him. And they derived from actually a Christian organization called the Oxford Group. And then Bill Wilson took their 6 steps, expanded them to 12, and also made them more, he democratized them, right? So it was no longer a Christian program of recovery. It was really for anyone, atheist, agnostic, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, doesn't matter, right? You can, it's a wide open door. And since then, when you think about it, like, it's amazing that tens of millions of people who were once deemed hopeless have found life, have found recovery, right? But here's the bigger news. The bigger news is that anyone could benefit from working the 12 steps, regardless of whether or not they identify as an addict or an alcoholic. It's good news.
So that applies to anything that you might be addicted to, or any behavior you're trying to, I guess, stop.
I think it's a whole life program, right? You don't have to come to the 12 steps with a compulsion or an addiction, though they are absolutely endemic in the culture, right? Like, without question, we are the most addicted cohort in world history. That's number one, right? Number two, I just think addiction is part of the human condition, right? Now, you may be, if there's a continuum of addiction, you may be on the mild side or the moderate or the severe. But the fact of the matter is that addictions, self-defeating behaviors, compulsions diminish us, right? But let's say you're like even saying, I don't think I have anything to do with addiction. My premise is, my argument is, okay, do you want a better life? Well, then try the 12 steps. I think everybody's an addict at some level, but you don't have to buy into that in order to go, oh, I could really use the 12 steps as a design for living.
So do you think the technology age has really heightened everybody's addiction with, your ability to so much information, whatever it might be, all the time?
Oh, I was with someone the other day on an airplane, and they happened to mention to me that they had looked at their son's phone, and 3 days earlier, he had watched 9 hours of TikTok. 9 hours of TikTok. Now, as another friend of mine likes to say, if you're not addicted now, you're just one click away, right? So recently had another woman reach out to me asking for help because she has discovered that her two 14-year-old sons have become addicted to sports betting, which, of course, over here in the United States is huge, right? Sports betting now on television, websites, everything else is you can't turn on a football game here and not see advertisements for big time sports betting, right? But listen, how about workaholism? How about drug addiction? How about alcohol addiction? How about overeating, sugar addictions, people pleasing, perfectionism, codependency, being addicted to, people's substances or behaviors, porn. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? All the way on the spectrum from, mild, you might call it a peccadillo if you want, all the way up to, needing immediate help because you're in a lethal situation.
So how do you go about finding help? You talk about the 12-step program, but where would you start? Say you've got a more recognized addiction, but say you haven't, as you're saying, anybody might just want to improve their life. Probably wouldn't just rock up to the nearest Alcoholics Anonymous. So how do you find where to go, who to talk to?
Well, first, just so everyone knows, right, there are hundreds of 12-step based programs out there. And it's not just AA or NA, Narcotics Anonymous, but there's OA, right? There's Spenders Anonymous. There's Debtors Anonymous, Shopping Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous. I mean, the list is kind of endless, I just got a workbook. It's right here on my desk for one of my coaching clients, which is the workbook for Workaholics Anonymous, right? Which is a very serious addiction that countless people suffer from. So where would I start? Well, that's why I wrote The Fix, honestly, because where do people start, right? Like, how can they access this program of living for themselves? So honestly, without wanting to be overly self-promotional, the fact of the matter is that it's the only primer I know on the 12 steps that's a nice entry point for everybody. And it also comes with a really good, really solidly written 120-page workbook so that you can actually do the steps as you read along with me. And, that said, you could also pull together 5 people and say, hey, let's do this together for 3 months. Let's just do a book study, be in a little book group together and go through the steps. So, yes, I think that community definitely accelerates the path of healing and transformation. But, jump in with a book and see what it does for you.
You talked about your experience twice with the kind of 12-step program. How did it actually change your life? I mean, kind of practical terms, what did it do to you? How did it reprogram your thinking, if that's what it did?
That is such a deep question. And it in fact, it's so deep a question, I had to write a book about it. It's, really, like, let me ask you a question, Philip. If I said to you, do you have a plan for life? Like, do you have a program for living around which you have organized your transformation and change into becoming the highest expression of who you can be? Most people are just out there doing their best, kind of like thrashing around. Sometimes they're grabbing for things and none of them really satisfy, or they don't really take root in their lives, right? I just think a lot of times people are wandering aimlessly without a plan, right? One of the things that the 12 steps taught me was like, oh man, here's a program for living. And it's really, if you think about it, it's really based around a couple of ideas. So in steps 1 through 4 of the 12 steps, it's really about perhaps beginning or enhancing and deepening your relationship with a higher power. So when we're talking about that, what we're talking about here is, this ability to surrender to whatever power you choose, right? Like whatever which one you choose. The fact that you know that you're not in control of life and that you can turn that over to somebody else. So it's actually about the enrichment of a spiritual dimension, right? Then the second part is about enhancing and deepening your relationship with yourself. The third part of it is enhancing and deepening your relationship with others. And then the last part, 10 through 12, is just about how do I cultivate a lifestyle that promotes health and growth in each of those 3 domains of my life moving forward. So like, I just get up every morning and I'm like, I got a plan.
When you talk about the believing in a power greater, if you're not of a religious persuasion, what does that mean then? How do you embrace that if you don't believe in a God, for example?
Yeah, this is the genius of the 12 steps, right? So the third step of the 12 steps is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. As we understood him. See, this is the beauty of it, right? Or her, or it, or whatever you choose to call it. But I mean, I go to 12-step meetings all the time and I hear people talk about their higher. I have a friend of mine who calls the wind his higher power, right? Others call it the universe, how the universe works, right? You get to kind of choose what that is. And what I've discovered is that oftentimes atheists and agnostics come to the 12 steps and with some degree of skepticism, or people who've been burned by organized religion, right? And they come very skittish to spirituality. And I'm like, hey, don't fret. All you need is a little willingness and openness. And you get to choose what higher power, what means to you.
So somebody listening to this then who thinks maybe they don't consider themselves to be an addict in the classic sense of the word, but you say, we've all got some addiction or other. What can they do then? I know you've written your book, The Fix, but what could they practically kind of do tomorrow? Is there a mind shift where you make the decision to kind of go and get some help?
So let's begin with maybe just a working, easy definition of addiction, right? So an addiction is any unhealthy, compulsive relationship with a person, behavior, or substance that has mood-altering effects and negative consequences, right? See, all addictions, well, let me put it this way. You know how people will say, oh, I'll use your name, okay, excuse me, but someone might say, oh, Philip has a drinking problem. Or Philip has a porn problem, or Philip has a gambling problem, right? And I'm always like, okay, I appreciate the sentiment, but it's not. Let's make our language. Let's employ a little precision with our language here. I would say Philip has a drinking solution. Philip has a porn solution. He has a gambling solution. The drinking, the gambling, the porn, or whatever your thing is not the problem. It's your solution to the problem, right? And so in your beautiful little mind, you at some point were experiencing internal distress, pain, trauma, whatever the case may be. And your little mind discovered, oh, when I am in a relationship with this person, behavior, or substance, I feel better. Like the pain, the distress, the dis-ease, the inquietude, all those things in my heart evaporates. I suddenly feel at home in my skin. I feel like I have discovered the secret silver bullet to solving all my problems, right? But eventually what happens is that your solution to your external solution to your internal problem becomes a bigger problem than the one it was intended to solve. Now you got 2 problems. Right? And now you're caught in this circuit, this unhealthy, crazy circuit, right? Where you just can't get out, right? It's like Groundhog Day. Now, what a person can do to get started is just to simply get honest about what that is in their lives, right? Like to really scan and monitor and do an inventory of their lives. And it just begins by getting honest. It's like saying, I have an addiction or a compulsive or unhealthy relationship with work, or I have an unhealthy preoccupation and relationship with the 4 glasses of wine I have every night. Or, you know what I mean? And by the way, like at least in the United States, we know that at least 10% of the population is in diagnosable addiction. And I don't know what it is in Europe and the UK, but I would wager that it's about the same, you know? So, I just feel like nobody can say I'm addiction free. It's just not the way humans are wired for addiction. I mean, just even biologically and neurologically wired for addiction. And, but every single addiction, regardless of how mild it is, has like as I mentioned earlier, a diminishing effect on the quality of our lives.
And you mentioned earlier, maybe doing it in a group. How important is it to do this with other people, to share that experience? Because you think of the traditional AA meeting and it's a group of people sharing their stories. How important is that to kind of success?
Well, look, you could do the 12 steps on your own and greatly benefit from them. But here's the deal. There's I think he's a social scientist. His name is Johann Hari. And Hari says the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. It's connection, right? And we live in an age where, loneliness is absolutely endemic. And addictions breed in isolation and in the dark, right? And what addictions hate is when you bring them into the light. So community is a big part of the healing process, which is why I say get 5 people, get 5 close friends together and do the steps, right? Or you can certainly find, a 12-step program out there for your particular thing. If you just went online, and there are online meetings, there are in-person meetings, there are all kinds of ways that you can connect to a group. But I do worry that loneliness is increasingly creating the environment where addictions can run riot.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of technology is based on you and the technology and doing that in isolation. I love your sentiment that addiction does not like connection, does not like you.
Oh, no. It is a major threat to the addiction.
So what about if you've tried a 12-step program or a 12-step program and, it's not worked for you, or you've fallen off it, or should you try again? Did you choose the wrong one? There must be a lot of people who have had a unsuccessful experience. What would you say to them?
Well, of course there are people, and even the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous refers to these people. There are some people for whom the program doesn't work, right? Now, it does say rarely have we seen a person fail who has, followed our path, right? But it's rarely. Sometimes it happens, right? So, for example, I've met people who, went to 12-step meetings and then maybe they went to 1 or 2 and they just didn't like the people. And I'm like, you only went to 1 or 2. There's millions of them. Like, go find one that really, fits you. When I go to a city, sometimes, I'll pop into a meeting. I'm like, that wasn't a great meeting, but whatever. I was there to support others, not just get something for myself. So whatever, it's fine. I guarantee you that anybody could find a group that was really, really supportive and great for them. Listen, the 12 steps and, in particular, Bill Wilson, they never said that it was the only way to find, happiness or sobriety. And they would be encouraging of however you find it, right? All I know is that it's worked for tens of millions of people. So that's a pretty good sample pool with, for success. And, So I'm a big believer in why forge a new path when there's a well-worn one that's worked for countless many.
At the beginning of the interview, I talked about Enneagram. You're the Enneagram guy, and I may still be pronouncing that wrong. Can you explain what that means to the audience?
So way back in maybe 2017, I wrote a book called The Road Back to You, and it sold well over 1 million copies. And it is a book about the Enneagram, which is a personality typing system that teaches there are 9 basic personality styles in the world, one of which we gravitate toward and adopt in childhood, just as a way to cope, to protect ourselves, and to navigate the new world of relationships. And it is a super helpful model of personality that helps people understand why they habitually and predictably act, think, and feel the way that they do in the course of a day, right? So think about personality as being, maybe we would define it in a non-clinical sense as being just how you typically show up for life, right? It's like, how do you show up for life every day? And you and I know it can be pretty predictable how we show up, right? And when you get it's a wonderful instrument for developing self-awareness, and it will dramatically improve relationships, your work, every aspect of your life, because the more information you have about your inner architecture and how you show up for life, the more you can accentuate those parts of your personality that are really wonderful, and get a handle on those parts of your personality that tend to get in your way. And I mean, it has proven to be an amazing tool in so many different spheres of life. And I was so shocked when the book did as well as it did. Like, it just went out of the gate hot. Like, people were just like, I can't get enough of this. And it's because the biggest mystery people face every day is themselves. And they just want to know, why am I the way that I am? And they want a path for growth, which the Enneagram offers, right? Like, here's what you look like at your best. Here's what you look like when you're not doing well. And here's how you can mitigate the problems of that part of your personality that tends to be more problematic than helpful to you.
So do you take a kind of test? Do you answer some questions? How do you find out which one of the 9 you correspond to?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 ways you could do it, right? First is you could take an assessment. I have one at my website. Maybe you can throw it in the show notes, but it's Ian Morgan Cron, CRON, and it's called the Typology Institute Enneagram Assessment. And that's a really helpful tool. We spent really hundreds of thousands of dollars having that test created by research psychologists and having it become a platform and a tool for both individuals and businesses. Or they can just read The Road Back to You, and which is a really nice primer. Again, I love primers. I love writing books that take complicated subjects and make them accessible and enjoyable to learn about. And it's a something that I know I've seen it save marriages, salvage careers, bring parents and children together in a way that they've been estranged for many years because they didn't understand each other. It's really, really eye-opening.
What are the kind of different, I don't expect you to go through them all, but what are the kind of different characteristics? I've done ones before where you're kind of introvert versus extrovert and, other sorts of.
So that's the Myers-Briggs. Now, I've worked with lots of different assessments, right? Myers-Briggs, StrengthsFinders, DISC, the Berkman, and I love them all. I mean, I think there's a place in the world for all of them. Here's why I love the Enneagram and rely on it more than any other. It doesn't just tell you what you do. It's not just descriptive. It tells you why you do it. So, for example, if you are an Enneagram 2, which is called the helper, your unconscious motivation, what's driving your behavior unconsciously, is this profound need to be liked and appreciated by others that leads you to try to meet the needs of others as a calculated strategy for winning approval and gaining love, right? Now, that's a very simple description of a 2, right? But these 9 types, this is what I hear all the time, are just uncannily accurate. You just go, wow. I mean, I have seen people cry in front of me when they read their type description because they're like, no one has ever. I've tried to describe myself to people and didn't do as good a job as this, and they're like, I just feel so seen and understood. And so I'm really thrilled that I get to do that work. It's really gratifying.
So if there are just 9 of those, then presumably they are kind of a little bit generic, but they are powerful, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, to be clear, I always tell people, all right, look, you're still mama's little special snowflake. Don't worry. There's nobody else quite like you. I'm not trying to put you in a box. In fact, the Enneagram doesn't put you in a box. It actually tells you about the box you're already in and how to get out of it. Right? Like, guess what? You kind of already are in a box of behavior, right? So we can actually start to name it and help you get out of those parts of it that are not serving you anymore. So, for example, if you go to the store to buy paint, I remember years ago, my wife said, "Hey, let's go to the paint store and we're going to get, I want to get this red for the dining room." Right. So I'm like, okay, great. That'll take 20 minutes. Right. And, we go to the store and then I realized, do you know how many different shades of red there are? Right. Like, in fact, on the color spectrum, there is an infinite number of reds. Right. So, but they're all red. So whether it's rose or ruby, right, they're still in the red family. And that's how I describe personalities. If you're a 3 on the Enneagram, we use numbers for them. If you're a 3, the achiever on the Enneagram, let's call that blue. Well, there's a million different shades of blue, and you are your own shade of blue, right? But you do share with all the blues on that continuum certain patterns and ways of thinking and feeling. So it preserves your uniqueness while also saying, guess what? Yes, you are unique, and you're also quite similar to another group of people inside of your particular personality style in terms of your unconscious motivations and drives.
And so if anyone's done any sort of psychotherapy, a lot of behaviors stem from your childhood and experiences when you're younger. How does that inform then the category that you're in?
Yeah, well, you're asking the old nature nurture question. And the answer is, if someone tells you, I know exactly with precision where the human personality comes from, and you just walk away. Just walk away from that person because it is so ding-dang complicated. Is it nature? Sure. I think people are born at some level with some biological proclivities, and they have, temperaments and dispositions that are fairly obvious from the moment they pop into the world, right? At the same time, personality is formed by familial forces, cultural and social forces, economic forces, by early childhood and later childhood trauma. You know what I mean? Like, there's just a lot that goes into the formation of a personality. It's complicated to know about the origins of personality outside of making some speculative cases for it, right? That's kind of how I view that question.
Can you change your personality? Can you change type? As you're saying, your underlying personality traits are pretty much there, and that's you, and it's with you for life.
According to the Enneagram, anyway, your type will never change, but clearly you can evolve in your type, right? And your type is on a continuum from low self-awareness to moderate self-awareness to high self-awareness. You can be a healthy Enneagram 3 or 4 or 5, or an unhealthy Enneagram 3 or 4 or 5, right? So there's the Enneagram is quite simple to learn, quite hard to master, because there's a lot to it. But the good news is you don't need to, go back to school to figure this thing out. You can get a book like The Road Back to You and get enough out of it that you could get started. Like I said, I think, I'll finish by saying this. Look, there's a quote in the book that I love. Came from the statistician George Box, who said, "All models are wrong, but some are useful." And I love that. my take on the Enneagram is it's a model. Like all models, it's imperfect, right? However, it's super useful because it is mostly true. You're never going to get something that's 100% true, right? Like all the Enneagram is going to give you, I think, is 10 or 15%, a 10 or 15% higher resolution picture of your inner world. But that's a giant leap forward. Like to have 10 or 15% more clarity about why you do the things you do. Holy smokes, that's huge. And some people would say that in their experience, it was a lot more than 10 or 15%.
Is there a link then between your Enneagram number and your propensity for addiction?
Oh, good question. You know, you sometimes hear someone say, oh, so-and-so has an addictive personality. Nonsense. There's no such thing. There's absolutely zero scientific or medical evidence to suggest that anybody has an addictive personality. I mean, I suppose you could say that, certain people have more impulse control problems or whatever the case may be. But the fact of the matter is addictions they are equal opportunity enslavers, right? You can right across the board of all personality types, you'll find people that are in recovery or in active addiction, right? So I don't think that there's any one particular type that's like, oh, be careful, you're the one, they can really afflict anybody.
Going back to the fix, first of all, I mean, I can kind of guess why you called it, but it'd be good to hear from you why you called it the fix. But then second part to that is, why do you think it was the right time now to bring that book out? You've already talked about the fact that addiction is kind of everywhere, but I'd be interested to understand the title and why now.
Yeah, but so obviously the title is a double entendre, right? Like addicts are always talking about looking for their fix, right? Now, and even people, that's even in just sort of common everyday street parlance, right? People say, talk about their coffee and they go, oh, it's my daily fix, they'll jokingly, right? Now, I also wanted to suggest, obviously, that the 12 steps were the fix, right? Not whatever your chosen behavior, substance, or whatever that you have been using previously. And why now? Well, again, I said earlier, number one, we live in the most addicted cohort in history. Number two, addictions will make you miserable. And in some instances, they'll kill you, depending on where you are on the spectrum. Number three, it was born out of my own personal experience and conviction. Like the fix is it goes through the 12 steps, but it does so through the narrative of my own life. And I don't know if this interview has revealed it, but I have a pretty, I believe in the power of humor. And so the book is an enjoyable read. It's got plenty of, it's not a glum, dreary, let's do these 12 steps. It's like, no, this is actually a really joyful adventure that's challenging for sure, but really fruitful and enjoyable. And, my mission in life has always been to introduce people to ideas and experiences that will deepen and improve their lives. So after being back in the rooms of recovery for 5 years, I was like, this has so changed me that it's time for me to share it with a broader group. So that's the why now.
So a lot of people who listen to this podcast are a bit older and perhaps struggling with kind of general fulfillment in life. You get to a certain age and perhaps you've just trodden the corporate wheel, or you've been doing something that perhaps you've never really felt is you. The concept of ikigai, the Japanese concept of finding out what you should really be doing on this planet. So can that help there? Is this a kind of practical way to start down the journey towards finding out who you are and what you really want to do in life?
Yeah, absolutely. See, because what it does is it's addressing first of all, the kinds of questions you're talking about are fundamentally spiritual. And what I mean by that isn't religious, right? They're just spiritual kinds of questions. Who am I? Where am I going? What is my purpose? What is the meaning of my life? Will I die having done something significant for a few other people in this world that made it better? These are spiritual questions, right? They're existential questions, ultimate life questions. So yes, the steps will help you to get to that, right? And because what the steps do is they're addressing three fundamental areas of rupture, right? One is a ruptured relationship with the spiritual world, the transcendent. I mean, listen, just the research shows, and I could show you the research out of Harvard. The research shows that essentially happiness is not something you can achieve, right? It's just happiness can't be achieved. It is the product of other things. So, for example, happiness is related to four pillars, actually. One is the transcendent, your relationship to the transcendent, right? We just know for a fact, whether people like this as a statistic or not, but people of faith, regardless of the faith, are statistically speaking much higher on the scales of happiness than those who do not have that. I'm just telling you, but you may not like that. All the Richard Dawkins and the Christopher Hitchens of the world may be, pulling their hair out at this very moment. But the truth of the matter is, science has shown that people who have a rich spiritual life are just generally happier than people who don't. Okay. So I'm not dictating to you what your spiritual life should be, but steps 1 through 3 will help you figure out what that is. Okay. The other pillars are your work, right? Then relationships with family, and then relationships with friends, community. So those are the 4 pillars. If you can get those 4 things straight in your life, so family, faith, friends, and work, then the research shows that that's a recipe for happiness and meaning, right? Like it's just not rocket science, right? And by the way, every great religious tradition of philosophy has said this for thousands of years. I don't know why Harvard thinks it's so smart, but they've just kind of quantified it, I guess, using scientific method. Now, yes, so the steps will take care of the spiritual one, 4 through 7. If you work those steps, then you're going to learn a lot about yourself, about those things which make you beautiful and those things that make you broken. Right? And they're going to help you exhume all the stuff that's not working and help you face it. And then it's going to help you forge when you get to steps 8 through, 8 and 9, 5, 8, and 9, you're going to discover ways to connect with friends and other people in new ways. And then you're going to learn about how to keep that whole system of living in place on a daily basis for the rest of your life.
And I like this idea that spirituality doesn't equate to organized religion. It's actually whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, I am not in the evangelism business, but I'm that is not my thing. I'm just the bar is set really low in the 12 steps, right? The bar isn't set high like you got to believe in Jesus or you got to do the Buddha thing, right? You can if you want. If you want that to be your higher power, perfectly great, go for it. But we're going to leave a lot of room open here for people to come at spirituality and higher power on their own terms.
Let me ask you one last question, Ian, and we've talked about this already, but just to kind of summarize, apart from buying your books, what is one practical step that someone can do today to begin their journey, toward recovery?
Well, I'm going to use the same answer I used before, but maybe I'll tweak it a little bit. And I never tire of talking about it. I got this really good friend of mine. Interestingly enough, he's a well-known author and he's a giant in this sort of productivity space, And he used to say to me, Ian, the one thing that stands between you and becoming the person you want to be is the truth. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? I said, dude, if you're not dealing with the truth, you're living in unreality. And so it is about getting honest, like just recognizing here are these patterns of self-destructive behaviors that appear in my life regularly that I can't seem to break out of. I have tried everything on my own. What's not working? Well, the steps would help you to address that, right? And to get out of that cycle.
Thank you, Ian. That's been really fascinating and good to end on that. And just thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Philip. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you want to find out more about Ian, then you can visit his website, Ian Morgan Cron, gmail.com. Ian's book, The Fix, How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. And his other book, The Road Back to You, and Enneagram Journey to Self-Discovery, are both available to buy from online stores. If you have a story to tell and you think your experience would help others, then please get in contact, either via the website, mid-lifemen.com, or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. If you've enjoyed listening, then please do rate and review the podcast, and it helps raise its profile. And then finally, there's a book called Men Speak Up, Journeys Through Mental Health, which is based on the podcast, and it's available to buy on Amazon and through other online retailers.